Welcome. In this journey, we unravel the life and the tragic end of Mary Ann Polly Nichols, the first canonical victim of the Whitechapel murders. Born into hardship, Polly's story begins in the shadows of Victorian poverty, where survival was a daily battle. Her path winds through the bustling heart of London, Fleet Street, alive with ambition, before descending into the grim alleys of the East End, where desperation ruled and danger lurked in every corner. Whitechapel in 1888 was a world apart. Overcrowded lodging houses, flickering gas lamps, and streets echoing with the cries of the forgotten. It was here, amid the chaos and squalor, that Polly's life intersected with the darkness history would never forget. From the promise of youth to the despair of destitution, we trace her final steps through Spitalfield's narrow lanes and into the night where terror waited. This is more than a murder. It is a window into a society fractured by poverty, vice, and neglect. A haunting reminder of lives lost to the shadows. Join us as we follow Polly Nichols, not just as a victim, but as a woman whose story still whispers through the fog of Whitechapel. Polly's story begins on a summer day, August 26th, 1845, deep in the heart of Victorian London. Doors taut, a narrow cobblestone passage tucked off Fleet Street. Here, amid the clamour of printing presses and the clang of locksmith shops, life for the working class was harsh, unforgiving. This was Polly's world. Born into poverty, her childhood unfolded in the shadows of industry and soot. Her father, Edward Walker, a blacksmith, hammered out a living in these cramped quarters. Her mother, Caroline, would not see Polly grow to adulthood. She was laid to rest in 1852 at St. Andrew, Holborn, a church just steps away from the bustling chaos of Fleet Street. From the very beginning, Polly's life was marked by hardship and loss, a pattern that would follow her into the darkest corners of Whitechapel. At 18, Polly stepped into what seemed a brighter chapter. On January 16th, 1864, she married William Nichols at St. Bride's Parish Church, a towering presence on Fleet Street, its bells echoing over the pressmen and printers below. For a time, life offered promise. The couple first settled on Bouverie Street, just a stone's throw from the clamour of the city's beating heart. But soon, they moved south, across the Thames, to 131 Trafalgar Street in Walworth. Walworth was different. Rows of terraced houses lined narrow streets, their soot-stained bricks standing shoulder to shoulder like weary sentinels. The air carried the scent of coal smoke and river damp. But for Polly, this was a step up, a modest home for a growing family, away from the relentless grind of Fleet Street. Yet beneath the surface of domestic life, cracks began to form. London was changing, and so was Polly's world. What began as hope would soon unravel into hardship, betrayal, and a descent into the shadows of Whitechapel. August 9th, 1868. Inside the quiet walls of St. Peter's Church in Walworth, Polly and William stood as their children were christened. For a fleeting moment, there was stability, a family rooted in faith, clinging to hope amid the relentless churn of Victorian London. But London was a city in motion, and so were its people. By 1874, the Nichols family had moved again, this time to the Peabody Buildings on Stamford Street, just off Blackfriars Road in Lambeth. These were no ordinary tenements. Funded by philanthropist George Peabody, they were model dwellings, an oasis of order and affordability in the midst of South London's industrial sprawl. Rows of brick blocks rose above the grime, promising sanitation and structure where chaos had reigned. From their windows, the south bank of the Thames lay close enough to smell the river's damp breath. Beyond it, the city pulsed with smoke and steam, its factories and wharves feeding an empire. For Polly, this was progress, a step away from the squalor of Walworth, a chance at something better. But even here, in the shadow of philanthropy, the cracks of poverty and despair were never far away. The promise of stability would not last. London's streets had a way of swallowing hope whole, and Polly's journey was only beginning its descent. By 1880, the fragile promise of family life had shattered. Marital strife, whispers of betrayal and bitter arguments drove Polly from her home. What followed was not freedom, but a spiral into instability. She became a wanderer in her own city, drifting between workhouses, those grim institutions where the destitute sought shelter under the weight of shame. Again and again, Polly entered the Lambeth workhouse on Prince's Road, her name etched into its ledger like a silent plea. From 1880 to 1883, she returned, each visit marking another step down a darkening path. When illness struck, the adjacent Lambeth Infirmary became her refuge, a place of cold beds and antiseptic air, where suffering was routine and compassion scarce. For a time, Polly sought solace with her father in Camberwell, but even blood ties could not mend the fractures. Arguments flared, harsh words were spoken, and once more, she was cast adrift, homeless, penniless, and alone. Polly's world narrowed to the streets. Each door closed behind her, pushed her closer to the shadows of Whitechapel, the place where her story would end in terror. After leaving her husband, Polly Nichols was entitled to a small maintenance payment, 5 shillings a week, but that lifeline was cut off when William Nichols claimed Polly was living with another man, identified as Thomas Stewart Dew at 15 York Street in Walworth. Under the strict Victorian poor law, any hint of adultery meant support could be stopped, and the parish agreed. The result was devastating. With no income and no home, Polly was pushed deeper into poverty, a downward spiral that led her to the East End streets. By late 1887, she was back in the workhouses, St. Giles on Endell Street in Covent Garden, Strand Workhouse in Edmonton, North London, and often she was caught, sleeping rough, along with many other transients, in Trafalgar Square. With no stable income and strict poor law rules, she was forced to move between multiple workhouses, Lambeth, Camberwell, St. Giles, and Strand, each offering only temporary refuge. Workhouses were deliberately harsh, designed to deter dependents, and inmates were often transferred or discharged. Polly frequently left these institutions to seek freedom in common lodging houses, but when money ran out, she returned to the workhouse system. Early 1888 saw her at Mitcham Workhouse in Holborn, central London, and Holborn Infirmary. Returning to Lambeth Workhouse, she befriended Mary Ann Monk. In May, however, she took a servant position at Ingleside on Rose Hill Road in Wandsworth. The estate was owned by Francis Cowdery and his family until late 1888. While working briefly at the house, Polly Nichols wrote to her father with a rare note of optimism. In her letter, she described her new position as comfortable and her employers as kind, assuring her family that things were looking up. For a moment, it seemed like Polly had escaped the cycle of poverty and instability. But this hope was short-lived. Within months, she left Ingleside after being accused of theft by the Cowderys and returned to the East End. By August 1888, Polly had drifted to the East End squalor. She stayed at Gray's Inn Temporary Workhouse, then Wilmot's Lodging House at 18 Thrall Street in Spitalfields, a notorious doss house in the heart of Whitechapel's rookeries. On August 24th, she moved to the White House at 56 Flower and Dean Street. The White House was a common lodging house run by the Smith family. It was notorious even among the slums for its scandalous reputation. Here, men and women shared beds without question, a practice that fueled rumors of unchecked prostitution and moral decay. The White House was more than a lodging house. It was a symbol of desperation. Its rooms were crowded with the homeless, the transient, and those living on society's edge. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and cheap gin, and the flicker of gaslight barely pierced the gloom. On August 30th, 1888, amid heavy rains and dock fires lighting the sky, Polly's final hours unfolded. Seen on Whitechapel Road at 11 p.m., she left the Frying Pan public house on Britt Lane around 12:30 a.m. Ejected from her lodging for lack of DOS money at 1:20 a.m., she met Emily Holland, a lodging housekeeper from Thrall Street, at the corner of Osborne Street and Whitechapel Road at 2:30 a.m. Emily was making her way home after watching a fire at Ratcliffe. Polly was stuttering slightly, her bonnet askew, her face flushed from drink. Emily had known Polly well. They had shared a room for 6 weeks at the lodging house, though Polly hadn't stayed there for the past 10 days. Concerned, Emily stopped her friend and asked where she was going. Polly, slurring but cheerful, explained that she had changed lodging houses and was trying to earn her DOS money, the 4p needed for a bed. She admitted she had already made the money 3 times that night, but each time spent it on drink. Now, she was determined to try again. Emily urged her to come back to the lodging house and sober up in the kitchen, but Polly refused. "I'll soon get my DOS money," she said, gesturing to her bonnet with a laugh. "See what a jolly bonnet I'm wearing." With that, she turned and staggered off along Whitechapel Road, heading east toward Bucks Row. As Emily watched Polly disappear into the mist, she was unaware that she would be the last friend to see Polly alive. Tragedy struck in the dead of night. Around 3:30 a.m., on August 31st, 1888, the East End awoke to horror. Polly Nichols lay lifeless in Bucks Row, now Darewood Street, a dim, cobbled alley swallowed by fog, just 150 yards from London Hospital. The gas lamps flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the stones, as if the city itself recoiled from what had happened. Her body was discovered by 2 carmen, Charles Cross and Robert Paul, on their way to work. At first, they thought she was merely unconscious, but as the lantern light fell upon her, the truth emerged in grotesque silence. Her throat slashed deep, her abdomen savagely mutilated. This was no ordinary killing. It marked the debut of a phantom who would haunt history. The figure we now know is Jack the Ripper. Polly's broken body was carried to the old Montague Street mortuary, a grim chamber where the dead waited for justice that would never come. Outside, Whitechapel stirred, unaware that a reign of terror had begun, a darkness that would grip London and never truly let go. The inquest into the death of Mary Ann Polly Nichols opened on Saturday, September 1st, 1888, at the Working Lads Institute on Whitechapel Road, presided over by Coroner Wim Edwin Baxter. The purpose was to establish the circumstances of her death and confirm her identity. The first witness was Polly's father. He identified the body at the mortuary, noting a childhood scar on her forehead and some of her missing teeth. He explained that Polly was 42 years old and had 5 children. He further admitted that Polly drank heavily at times, which had strained family relations, but he denied ever turning her out of his home. Dr. Rhys Ralph Llewellyn, who examined the body, testified that Polly's throat had been cut twice, deep wounds severing the carotid arteries, and her abdomen was mutilated. He believed death was instantaneous and occurred where the body was found. The injuries suggested a strong, swift attack, likely by someone with anatomical knowledge. He estimated the time of death as shortly before 4 a.m., aligning with the discovery by Charles Cross and Robert Paul. Inspector Helston and other officers from the Criminal Investigation Department attended. They confirmed there were no signs of robbery. Polly's clothing was arranged, and her possessions included a comb and a piece of mirror. This fueled speculation that the motive was not theft, but something far more sinister. Polly was buried on September 6th at City of London Cemetery in Manor Park, her grave marked simply. Polly Nichols became the first canonical victim of Jack the Ripper, a name that would echo through history. Her death marked the beginning of a reign of terror that gripped London's East End, exposing the poverty, desperation, and vulnerability of its women. Today, the gateway where she died is gone, replaced by modern streets, but the story remains, haunting every brick and shadow of Whitechapel. Polly Nichols wasn't just a victim. She was a mother, a daughter, a woman trying to survive. Her life ended in darkness, but her story shines a harsh light on the world she lived in. And as long as we walk these streets, her footsteps and those of her killer will never truly fade.